Okay, this is part 7 of the vlog of the table build, and I've got a few things to cover this week. Going to be starting out by completing the dock and canal section of my board piece. I've got all the interior work done here. I've now got the mill printed out to go on here, and I'm going to finish off the river section at the front. So hopefully I can get this whole section done this week. That's the plan. I've got some leftover cast up pieces of my Hurst Art molds that I will make the dock area out of, just so that it kind of matches in. But then after that I'll be moving over to the printed side. So I'm going to cover my outcome of my first major building to be printed for the table. I'm going to talk about how I'm going to do the post-processing on it, because there is a little bit of cleanup work to do, and move on to how I'm going to go about printing it. But you can already see it's a great size piece. This was about 5 days to print. So got a few thoughts on the process so far, so let's get into it. Okay, so this is a closer up look at the mill that I've printed. I've got a Space Marine for scale, because these guys got to have some sort of use. And you can see that it's actually a pretty good size. So this took somewhere between 4 to 5 days to print the whole thing. But the best thing is the printer was running in the background. So even now that I've got this off and I'm going to start working on it, I've got the next piece coming out of the machine. So while I'm working on this, hopefully more should be being produced. So I think it's going to be more time efficient. So actually looking at the piece in detail, this is a file that I bought. It comes with a lot of different parts. So first of all, we've got the water wheel that fits on the side. I've not printed the base that this thing stands on because I want this to be hanging over the lip of the canal that I've already built. So this is where the water wheel will go in. Pretty happy with how it's come out. This is the side that goes up against the building. So you can see it's got a wood grain texture. Really nice texturing on all the paddles. The problem is you've got these little stringy bits. And these are really, really hair thin wisps that I can quite easily get off, which I'll show shortly. The piece comes in multiple parts so it fits on the print bed. So you have this little side annex piece here with a little roof, and then you've got the mill proper. So this is where it fits on. It's got these little locator pins so you can fit everything together nicely. At this sort of range on the table, you can't really see the layer lines that much. I can see them worse on this material compared to the other one I used, because this is quite glossy. So I've got a few steps to go through after this to get rid of them, but you can see that it's very playable because the roof comes off, and the roof's great detail. With all different textures. So you've got like stucco and wood and slate roof and cobblestone chimney. It's got all the windows. So you've got a playable first floor, which also comes out, so you can put your minis in there if you're playing a skirmish based game. I actually like that it doesn't have a staircase, because you get maximum playable space on the floor below. So I'll just put a ladder in, and then you've got the ground floor, which again, quite well textured with the different designs. You've got the stucco breaking away to reveal brickwork here. You've got things like the little window sill inside. Everything inside is textured. Again, needs a little cleanup, but it's not that difficult to do. And again, for skirmish-based games, you can use a playable inside, and there's a door in and out, so you've got quite a lot of options. So overall, pretty happy with these kits. The first thing I'm going to do now is get the Dremel out and probably do a little bit of time lapse of some of the trimming that I'll need to do, because it's not perfect. I also haven't worked out how to do it quite right. I needed to put a little support here in the program so that it could print the door frame, because it prints from the bottom up in layers, and creating a layer over thin air hasn't gone so well. It's a little stringy, as you can see here, but won't be noticeable once I finish it. But overall, really, really good. I mean, if I bring it up close, apart from the little wisps, all the textures came out quite nicely, and definitely give me something really good to work with. And given the amount of effort that went into just taking the pieces off and sending the next one to print, pretty happy with it so far. Right, so it's hobby knife time as I go around and trim off all the little edges and lumps and bumps, and then go in with the Dremel just to clean things up and get them looking good. Okay, so we're all done with the cleanup. Pretty happy with it so far. Got one or two little tiny bits here where I didn't get it exactly right, but that's okay. That'll be a bit of moss or a bit of vine or something growing up there to hide it. But overall, really happy with the outcome. Time to move on to priming. I've got this to use. This is a filler primer. You get different brands in different countries. But this is a slightly thicker than usual primer with part of the formula that will let it settle down into all the grooves between the lines. It's designed for smoothing out imperfections in cardboard. bodywork, so it's perfect for this. Shouldn't obscure the detail, but just helps smooth it over. And then I can sand down one or two little bits that aren't quite right before I move on to priming it black. And another reason why I wanted to use the black filament, if there are any tiny spots that I do miss or really can't get to, like just down in between these two pieces, I'm going to just use the blackness of the whole piece to kind of hide that in shadow. So let's see how this goes. Okay, so I primed the model in a variety of colours. I did the filler primer, which had some effect, but actually, to be honest with you, I don't think it was worth it. After the cost of the primer, I think I'll be better off just going with a regular primer can. So I've done the roof in black, I'll probably do these in slate tiles. I've done all the siding here in the leftover Zandri dust that I had, but it's just a sandy colour. It's going to make painting all of the texturing here, this stucco type effect, quite easy. All the stone pieces in grey, obviously I'll base the other stone bits in grey, and then what I had left of my Mornfang brown I used up on the wheel, though it'll need a brush coat just to make it nice and solid. So overall, quite straightforward. So moving on to the painting part, what I'm going to do is use a sponge. So I've got my lighter colour here and a sponge, and I'm going to wet the paint down slightly. And by sponging it on like this, you get the random texture, but also you don't bring out all the layer lines like you'll get with using a dry brushing process. So the paint's relatively thinned down where I've sprayed the water on it, and it looks quite stark at the moment, but once it dries, it'll be a lot more subtle. And what I found is best with this is to get the base colours on like this now, and then do some shading afterwards, because again, you don't want to do all over washes, because it's just going to seep down into the layer lines and show them off. So what I'll do is I'll go around and sponge on all of the highlighting on this stucco effect first, and then once I'm happy with that, I'll move on to the other parts. Right, sponging complete, and from a tabletop distance it's looking pretty good with some shading around the edges. I've also blocked in some of the stone, so it'll add a bit more variety, and then when the wood texture's done in a brown and I get some slaty blue-grey on the tiles, I think it's going to look pretty good. So the next step is to let this dry, probably give one more coat to the grey, because it was hard to go over the pale colours, and then I'll start sponging on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tear up some small pieces of sponge from these large blocks, and I will go in around the edges first, where it borders with the cream, and then go over the middle bit after that. And the last thing to do will be all the timber work. So I'm going to sponge on 2 tones of grey as a base coat, and then 1 tone highlight, and see how that comes out. And by using the sponging, again, it's mostly masked the layer lines. You certainly really can't see them very much. And then once I'm done with all the base painting and got all the main colours on, I'll probably seal it and then go in with some weathering, as I've done with the thin down acrylics in the past, and water to just go around everything to add a bit more shadow. I think with the 3D printed pieces, they lack a little definition in some places, and the best thing to do to sort that out is exaggerated shadows and make it look a little bit cartoony. But I'm okay with that, because at a tabletop distance it'll come out looking really good. Right, moving on to the stone pieces, I've started here sponging on this colour called taupe. It's a browny, grey, beige colour, it's kind of weird. And I'm sponging it on like this onto the stonework to really break it up. I've done the base coat of this dark grey, and so far this is doing a really good job of creating a mottled pattern to the stone. Again, try not to use dry brushing, which I normally would do all over the stone, to avoid bringing out the lines. But this is working really well. I'm just using a piece of artist's sponge, which is any old kind of random shaped sponge would do the trick, and it's given it a nice kind of uneven colour, especially important on these. Now this is the upper surface, and you can see you get kind of these layers that are very visible, but they're in the flat rather than this way. It's a terrible way of describing it. They're like the contour lines on a map. That's what it kind of looks like to me. So by, again, random spotting with the sponge, once you hold it a little distance away, you kind of lose sight of them, but you still get the paint going on top of the stone and not sinking down into the recesses. So you still get your shading and highlights, but you're not drawing attention to the fact that you've got this strange pattern that you don't want to get. Again, the layer lines here nicely hidden by using the sponging process. So doing this all over, and then I'm going to go in with a second grey and maybe a lighter grey after that just on the edges, and we'll see how that comes out. Right, 2 layers of grey sponging done, and I think the variety helps really pick out the bricks and break up the block of grey. It's worked particularly well on the little outhouse piece that has a lot more texture to it, where it's really shown up the variety of the texture of the stone. But overall, pretty happy with how it's gone so far. So next up will be to paint the wood, and I'm probably going to go with a more traditional way of painting wood, of actually putting these in a light brown and a wash, and seeing how that comes out. I won't dry brush them, but I may just use a side of a brush to just pick out some of the planking details that are there. Right, I've done a test of the wood. I've done it on one side to keep myself sane in order to get this out in the video in time. And what I've done is I've gone in with a base coat of Mornfang Brown. So I switched over to my miniature paints here because the detailing, it was much easier to get these things done in one coat when you're doing small pieces. Gone over it with a bit of Agrax Earthshade, everybody's favourite wash. Maybe it's Null Oil, but for me it's Agrax. It's picked out the detailing quite nicely. Hasn't done too badly with the layer lines, I think, because there was quite a lot of paint on there before to hide all the layers. Then I've gone over with an edge highlight of just running the brush sideways over the piece, just very gently like this, with XV88, which is the kind of light brown base paint from GW. And then I've just done an edge highlight here with Zandri Dust. So that is your sand colour, and that brings it back up to actually the colour that I primed the beige walls with in the first place. At arm's reach, I'm pretty happy with the outcome. The wood looks nice, you can see the texture. The stonework's picked out quite well, and the stucco looks fairly believable. What will happen now is I'll do the wood trim all the way around, and then probably in the next video, I'll get in the weathering stages, because I've got some browns and greens and a few other paint options to get in some weathering and to really show the different panels and really make things exaggerated so it pops a little bit more. Okay, so this is where I'm up to with the canal section so far. I have used the same process I've done in the past, where these tiles are glued down with the Gorilla Glue, expanding polyurethane glue. They're based on the heavy cardstock that I've been using, so that they're very sturdy. And I've actually now gone to the point of gluing in the panels that I made previously that line the canal. This mill is still to go on its base, that will go on top of here, that will have some flagstones here and all the detailing on top, so it will look like it blends in with everything else. I've got a few issues I've had to tidy up. So one, I didn't design this very well, and there's a gap in the corner here, so I'm gonna have to put an actual piece of wood in here, I think. And I had a gap down here that I just couldn't get pieces to fit into, so I made a little ladder that I then again need to just fill in the corner here with a small piece of wood. But overall, pretty happy with how that's gone. Down this side is where the castle wall for the city will be. So what I will need to do is to actually start blending this in to the river part with some sculptor mold, because it will be under the wall, so you won't be able to see it easily, but it will still be visible, so it needs to look nice. And I've also cut out the bit that butts up against the other piece of river, so I can finish sculpting the whole of the river so that it flows through into one piece, and then eventually it'll get textured and have the resin pour done. So I've got a few more pieces to go on the building. So the paint job's mostly done, apart from the interior floor and the roof. So I've base coated the roof in the dark blue grey, and I'll start the sponging, and should be able to catch up on it fairly quick. The intention here is to have some steps that come down that lead to the wooden dock area that I will have run up here and probably along this side, so it gives a bit of playable area and a bit of functionality to make it look like a dock, and may even have a little boat in here at some point. And what I'm going to do is use a lot of the leftovers that I've got from the other projects that I've cast. So again, I got rid of a lot of my Hearst Arts molds, but kept all my extras, because I knew there were a few bits like this that needed sorting out. So I've got some bridge parts here, and the best thing is that these are all same sized blocks, so I can easily build like an L-shaped side like this, and then a repeat one over here, and put the stone slabs in between to create kind of steps down really easily. and a little piece along the back here. So it's gonna be very easy for me to make a filler piece. And then what I will do is use my leftover wooden planking pieces to build out a little jetty to run around the side. So I think the easiest way for me to do that is going to be to get on with doing a time lapse and lay it out flat, and then eventually it'll go up on little pillars to keep it up off the floor, so that when I pour the resin into the canal piece, it doesn't overflow onto the dock. And it's time for the homemade sculptor mould. So it's a thin
Right, so building the
mix,
platform, I was just taking my
care
care to use as many of the long pieces as I can as possible, to leave a lot of the short pieces behind for building the posts,
jammed a bit of
which you
toilet
can see me
paper
put in
behind
there.
that
I had to put the long one at the end because I ran out of pieces.
Once I go over it with the sculptor mould, it'll be nice and strong. I made 2 or 3 batches here. Once you go past the first batch, you really have to move quickly because the existing plaster in the pot causes it to set up really fast. If you go beyond 3 batches, I would start using a clean pot. And then after that, you see me spritz the tiles down with water and clean them up with a brush where I had a few splashes of plaster. As long as you get it wet, it won't set too quickly. Right, time to get on with the riverbed, and I'm going to show the area up here by the canal because I've got that furthest progressed, and I've also gone and done bits of the other river because it's great at showing where I need to put a little bit more sculptor mold to fix the issues, which is fine. So over here, what I'm going to do is start by going over this with the dirt textures, and then I've got some rocks and things to add, and I'm going to let everything set, and then in the next vlog update I will be doing probably the river pour, which will be the resin, so that'll be an interesting one. And what I'll also cover is how I've done the rocks, because these aren't finished yet, they need a black wash over them and whatnot, but I'll show them on the cliffs because it's going to be much clearer. So first of all, I'm going to add some Mod Podge to the little working pot here. This is the best stuff to use because it dries really tough and nice and matte. You don't want a shininess underneath the soil. And then the best thing to do is just to give everything a liberal coat, and don't worry because it dries perfectly clear, so if you get some on the rocks, not a big issue. And what I've got set to one side is my 3 grades of soil that I showed previously where I sieved them, so the coarse, medium and the fine. And the reason it's painted brown is just in case there's any gaps in what I'm doing. Now here I'm going to be very generous with the larger pieces on the riverbed, and then as I go up the sides I'll be using more of the medium. So there's the medium going on there, and then I've got this fine sieved dirt, and this will be thrown at, seems strange, but I need to throw it like this at the upper sides because getting it to stick to those vertical surfaces is tricky, and I like to do it in 2 lots. So I've done some now and I'll do some more later. Where it gets on the rocks here, I'll just brush that off once the Mod Podge has dried, and everything will get a sealing coat before I go ahead and put on the resin, because I want to make sure everything is locked in place before it touches the resin. So once all this dries and I've done the groundwork, I've also got some pebbles. So I bought some pebbles designed for going in a fish tank. The bigger ones are too big, but these other ones are great for the bottom of the river because you get smoother pebbles where the water runs over them. So they'll be really, really good. So I'll get on and do the rest of this river section, and let's take a look at the canal next. Right, so I've got a solution for the steps down. I just built this little step out of my leftover Hearst Arts blocks that will go in here. I need to shim it up with a bit of card just so it sits underneath that slab. It's not finished on this front here because this is where I'm going to start putting in the wooden part of the structure. So what I will do is I will use all of the leftover beam mold pieces, these long planks, to build a walkway that goes round the edge here. It will sit just above the water line, so it'll give me a good idea when I do the resin pour just how much I need to put in. Right, I just finished this off with a view of the stones because it's worth pointing out that I made sure to bury them in a reasonable amount of dirt as I was putting them on the board, so they look like they've been buried in the riverbed for a while. It just adds to the realism. So they look quite good. They'll look a lot less shiny once the glue dries. And when we come back next vlog, there should be quite a lot of progress on the river and we'll be ready for the pour, which is a bit I am looking forward to and dreading at the same time. So catch you then.